the rooting for chaos continues with regard to public safety. So you may have noticed that chaos has absolutely continued in Portland. We got chaos in Chicago. We got chaos all over the country as the idiot defund the police crowd and their Democratic and media allies have made cities across the United States significantly less safe for American citizens. Well, in Portland, basically the media ignored for 2 months, for 2 rolling months, they ignored the chaos in Portland. And it wasn't just 2 months. I mean, Antifa has basically been running the center of the city at the behest of Mayor Ted Wheeler for years. Andy No, a friend of the program, he's been reporting on this. He's been beaten up for his trouble in Portland for reporting on the fact that Antifa would do things like stopping drivers in the middle of the street in broad daylight, and the authorities were told not to do anything. Well, basically, the media had a strategy with Portland. We're going to ignore all the chaos because we kind of like Antifa up until the point the feds come in, at which point we will pretend the feds are the aggressors. That's been the narrative promulgated by the media, and it's fully crazy. The only reason to do that is because you are rooting for chaos. And you're rooting for chaos because you think it's going to get rid of Trump. The more chaos there is, the more you think that Trump will go. I cannot come up with any other explanation for this. Because if a Democrat were president, you presumably would not be rooting for chaos in this way. Okay, Mike Baker reporting for the New York Times. With a ski helmet and goggles on her head, Allison Hyder recounted how she had told relatives she planned to stand at the rear of protests in downtown Portland. But in the early hours of Tuesday, the grandmother of 5 found herself right up front, locking arms with other mothers dressed in yellow. So the media have been running cover for all of these kind of protest moms who are standing up front of the protests. And then they've been ignoring the fact that the protesters are setting up barricades and burning crap, like literally setting things on fire and resisting federal officers and local officers. But we have to focus in on naked Athena, the weird naked lady doing yoga poses, standing as a symbol of freedom against these brutal tyrants. We have to focus in on the moms. First of all, let me just say to you Antifa protesters out there, if you're calling your mommy because you're too much of a pansy to actually just take the brunt of what you're dishing out, you have to call your mommy to stand as your human shield, you're a wimp. You're a wimp. For all your faux masculinity, you're a wimp. Standing with a pack of other protesters, she chanted in front of the boarded-up entrance to the federal courthouse. She remained resolute, even as some in the crowd began prying at the wood affixed to the building, leaving Miss Hyder uneasy about where things were headed. I am the face of anarchy, Miss Hyder declared. The people of the U.S. need to know moms, grandmas, nurses are out here in the middle of the night demanding rights for everybody. Okay, so we're going to focus in on her. Like, isn't the buried headline there that people are prying away boards from the federal courthouse to try and vandalize it again? Wouldn't that be the headline? The demonstrations that have shuddered through Portland for 54 consecutive nights have drawn out a complicated mix of grievances, says the New York Times, with a wide array of people expressing them using a multitude of tactics to make sure they get heard. Oh, it's just a way of getting heard, guys. You see, if anti-lockdown protesters like just show up and say things, then they're bad racist people who are endangering other people. If you show up to a federal courthouse and try to burn it down, that's just your way of being heard. Don't you see how this works? And if you call your mommy to protect you, that's because you're so brave. Because really, these protesters, they're all 60-year-old moms. They're not a bunch of woke white kids who are living in their parents' basement and masturbating to anime. In Oregon, a state with a deep history of racism that included racial exclusion laws extending into the 20th century, the Portland protests have persisted since George Floyd's killing, even as BLM demonstrations have waned in many other parts of the country. Okay, alternatively, Antifa's been making trouble in this area for literally years on end. Some leaders in the black community, grateful for a widespread discussion on race, worry that what should be a moment for racial justice in Portland could be squandered by violence. Oh, you think? The city's mayor, Ted Wheeler, is angry because the feds are coming in. So here's what's happening. Chaos in the streets of Portland. And when President Trump steps in, then we hear that President Trump is the bad guy. So Oregon's governor said to the feds, Governor Kate Brown, she said, we want you to go home. How about this? Call out these state troopers. You are the governor of the state. Are you okay with the chaos that you are seeing in the streets of Portland? Apparently the answer is yes, because so long as you can just rip on Trump, everything is good to go. Here's Governor Kate Brown being a horrible public servant. But again, she's not serving the public. She's serving her own political interests and the interests of her party.
When I spoke to the Secretary of Homeland Security last week, I told them to go home, that their forces are not needed here, they are not wanted here, and they're making a challenging situation worse. As I said, the violence is absolutely unacceptable. We're talking about outliers in terms of protesters. But in Oregon, we solve problems by sitting down. We solve problems by de-escalating a situation and engaging in dialogue.
What in the F is this lady talking about? There have been rolling riots in her cities for 54 straight days. She sounds exactly like the mayor of Seattle, Jenny Durkin, who sort of whistled past the graveyard on CHOP up until the point where people started getting shot to death in the middle of her major city. Joe Biden, By the way, this should be such a winning issue for Trump, because guess what? Most Americans don't like this crap. They do not like watching federal courthouses get burned. They do not like chaos in their streets. They're not fond of any of this. And Joe Biden is embracing the suck. I mean, he really is. Joe Biden put out a statement. He's been pretty careful about what he says on this sort of stuff because he doesn't want to appear like a radical. But what he has said on what's going on in Portland is truly insane. He assailed President Trump and his administration for, quote, brutally attacking peaceful protesters and using egregious tactics in response to recent demonstrations in Portland, Oregon. He put out a statement to BuzzFeed. He said, we have a president who is determined to sow chaos and division to make matters worse instead of better. He said, we all remember the appalling scenes in front of the White House when peaceful protesters were gassed to make way for a Trump photo op. Now, Homeland Security agents, without a clearly defined mandate or authority, are ranging far from federal property, stripped of badges and insignia and identifying markings to detain people. They are brutally attacking peaceful protesters, including a U.S. Navy veteran. Okay, that's not true. Okay, that's not true. They are fully identified. They have police badges on them. If you look at their shoulders, they have insignia that explain which branch of the government they are from. In fact, here is a DHS official yesterday cracking back on Joe Biden's idiot statements here. The fact is, not only is there statutory authority for what the feds are doing right here, they are identifying themselves, and they do have the authority to do it. Here is a DHS official explaining yesterday.
This is the identification every single one of them has on their uniform. And this is a baseline. Director Klein said he doesn't have his officers wear name tags because they're being doxxed. That's exactly right. That's another thing that's absolutely disgusting. So they're not only jeopardizing the lives of the agents, but they're also jeopardizing the lives of their families as they're putting out their home information and they're suggesting that individuals go to their homes. So yes, I, as the acting commissioner, have authorized and supported removing their names from their uniform. Instead, what we have, though, is a personal identifier.
Okay, so he is correct about this, but we've heard from Biden that it's the fascists in the streets, the jackboots in the streets. Kayleigh McEnany over at the White House yesterday, she said, by the way, we do have statutory authority for this. There's statutory authority to assist Department of Homeland Security by shifting forces from, for example, Customs and Border Patrol. And like there's statutory authority. Idiot Jamel Bouie at the New York Times, of course, has a piece talking about how this is just awful and a violation of all law. He admits, by the way, in his column that there is lawful authority to do all this stuff and lots of precedent. He says the difference lies less in the acts themselves than in the way these events developed. Use of military force against strikers and protesters is certainly controversial, but for the most part, it unfolds along clear lines of responsibility and involves powers expressly granted to the president. Okay, the president does have the ability under the Insurrection Act to call in federal forces to quell exactly the sort of activity. There is statutory authority. There have been no constitutional allegations of violations. Jamel Bouie just doesn't like it because Trump's doing it and because he is sympathetic to the goals of the people who are militating in favor of chaos. He says a secretive nationwide police force created without congressional input or authorization, formed from highly politicized agencies. Highly politicized agencies, by the way, according to Jamel Bouie, means agencies where people are sympathetic to Trump. That's what highly politicized means. So the State Department, which is very much a left-leaning department, not highly politicized. ICE, because there are a lot of people who support Trump, highly politicized, according to Jamel Bouie, which means they're bad, which means they're a tyrannical wing of the U.S. government. Anyway, here's Kayleigh McEnany explaining, yes, in fact, there is legal authority to do this.
What you're referring to is Portland, and 40 U.S. Code 1315 gives DHS the ability to deputize officers in any department or agency, like ICE, Custom and Border Patrol, and Secret Service, quote, as officers and agents. They can be deputized for the duty of, in connection with the protection of property owned or occupied by the federal government and persons on that property. And when a federal courthouse is being lit on fire, commercial fireworks being shot at it, being shot at the officers, I think that falls pretty well within the limits of 40 U.S. Code 1315.
Right, and she's talking specifically about U.S. code that prevents the assault of federal property. And she's correct about this. There is authority to do this. Nonetheless, as we'll see, Democrats are militating in favor of the rioters and the looters, which means they're rooting for the chaos. They want the chaos. The chaos is good for them politically, and they are happy to castigate as Gestapo members of federal law enforcement who are identified as such. And at this point, you have to say these are folks in the Democratic Party and the media promulgating this narrative who do not care about law-abiding citizens. They don't. They're willing to abandon law-abiding citizens in favor of rioters and looters. So I don't know where you would put them on the good for America scale, but I don't think it would be on the good for America side, particularly, because this isn't good for America. It ain't. Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional leftist tier? Don't ask me why. That's called science. To take advantage of this amazing opportunity, hit the like button.